right, here we are, Renee. What are we talking about today?
Well, today we've got another new topic. We're going to be talking about competency to stand trial. And this ties back into what we discussed on our last episode regarding civil commitments. And so we're going to be chatting about how this intersects with criminal justice system, as well as talking about mental health and substance use. But before we dive into all of that, Jason, what is going on at the farm this summer?
Well, it's summer, and so now it's that fall, waiting for fall anxiety is starting to ramp up. And so every now and then I get a little obsessive compulsive. So I've been looking at my toolbox and I have a couple sockets that don't match. So I got on eBay and then, I started ordering so I would have a matching set, which is really useless. Like, so I bought a couple of singles, so that when I look at the socket set in the toolbox, they all match, right?
Oh,
But some are a newer Craftsman style than the older Craftsman style. That kind of bothers me. So I bought an old, socket. It's ridiculous, right? I have too much time on my hands. I need to be working harder, or I need to be doing something different because that's pretty ridiculous, I think.
yeah. And it goes back to what you talked about last segment about too many auctions. So I bet you can find all kinds of random pieces at auctions, right?
Well,
So
sometimes they have like this bucket of sockets. I'm like, that might have the one I need in it, but I don't need to spend like, $10 to get 40 sockets. And then it might not even be what I want. And then I just have more sockets laying around. And you know
but
about
they're
clutter.
smart. Yeah.
So I'm limiting myself of taking those risks, even though that could be a really great deal, Renee, like
You
a
like
really great deal.
that's a way to sell those. Stick them all in a bucket, be like $10, you get what you get. Good luck to you. That's
But
pretty
some of
fun.
those you could sell for $10 a socket. So I should buy
Uh,
them, put them on eBay, and
oh,
I could be making a good living right now
that
because
does
you
not
can
sound
make
good.
money doing that. You
Don't you have
can.
plenty of stuff in the house that Jennifer would think you can sell right now on eBay?
Oh, absolutely. But, that's not near as fun as these other things. So that's my farmer
There you go.
moment of the
Farmer update
day.
of the
There you
summer.
go.
They're being bored and getting in trouble buying too much stuff. Well, yeah, I wouldn't want to be doing any of that. Well, today to kick us off, we're going to be talking about the competency to stand trial. And we're thinking about like, why is this even needed in the first place? And this is for when we talk about our whole system and some of the treatment and system failures that we have. We have people that end up not getting the treatment that they need, whether it's in substance use or in mental health. And then they make decisions that are really poor, and they end up going in front of a judge because they've done some illegal behavior. And the illegal behavior itself could be just purchasing more of the drugs that they were trying to use. It could also be taking things from others so that they could afford the drugs that they were using. And it could also be, if it's on the mental health side, all litany of things where they could end up being violent in a place where they shouldn't have been violent, back to substances, driving under the influence. I mean, there's just most, I've said this before and I'll say it again, 95% of the folks I see, if not higher, in the criminal justice system have one of these two issues. And so when it comes to seeing a judge, they have to be found competent to understand. So, Jason, to start us off, what does it mean to be competent to stand trial? What do they need to be able to be competent in that setting to stand trial?
Yeah, and I think this is a hard conversation because I think for the most part, the community behavioral health system has done a poor job of engaging with the legal system and
Mm-hmm.
really dealing with these challenges. And I think that, the more we do this work, the more we realize this disconnect. And I think, as a behavioral health provider and managing clinics in the past, I don't think we ever truly understood the true connection, right? As we've evolved into this space. And that's why I think it's
So,
so timely that we really talk about what does it mean to be competent, right? It means that the individual has the understanding of what the proceeding against them are, that
mhm.
they have the ability to assist in their own defense. And if they cannot understand or assist, they can be deemed legally incompetent.
Yeah.
And they can be found incompetent if they have an intellectual disability or an active mental illness. And so when we think about those folks who end up in the wrong place, not getting treatment, we see a lot of this happening, right, Renee?
Yep. This is going to pop into story time pretty early, but I've got a guy that writes me, and I wish I could write back. I'm always afraid if I start writing back at the parole board that I'm going to get 1,500 pen pals that I don't need. So I can't write back, so I can only take it one way. But he writes me regularly, and I can tell he definitely has a mental health disorder. But his story, as far as I can tell today, was a mixture of alcohol and Xanax when he committed this crime. And it was a horrendous crime. He really violently hurt somebody else, disabled, like they lost an eye in the process and all of this. But in his inability to understand, I don't exactly know how the trial process worked because he got incarcerated. But so he's trying to say he's not competent to stand trial after the fact, which is not how that works. But it's entertaining because he sends me all the time how he's not competent to stand trial. But he's like, telling you the story is about what happened and all. It was a super violent situation. And he's come down to he thinks it was a blend of this, his prescription meds and his alcohol and whatever. But yeah, I don't know how he made it through a competency to stand trial from the letters that I receive, but I'm not the person to make those decisions. So once you're incarcerated, it's kind of too late on this subject to deal with competency, right? Because you've got to think about it at the front end. And the places where you can see challenges with competency is if there's blackout situations where people don't remember the crime itself, which happens often in the alcohol use realm. Or in rage use realm where they just don't even recall having done it. That's an issue that comes up with competency. Or if their legal limits were so high or they were blacked out, passed out, then when the crime occurred and they have no recollection, you can land competency there. Or like we just said about intellectual disabilities, they just don't really understand how the system works or the charges being filed against them. And then it's not really fair then to hold them accountable to something. You could have people maybe with a brain injury or with a cognitive distortion, maybe cognitive failings that they maybe have, like an Alzheimer's or something, and they just don't remember doing the crime. That's where you really kind of land in this competency space. And so I
think of people experiencing psychosis as well.
Yeah, true.
So, I think of individuals who are disconnected from reality, and we've seen that, right? We've been into jails. I mean, it's still seared in my memory. When we walked through a very large jail in a very large county of a state, and we saw individuals who were pretty much going untreated for their very severe psychotic disorders, and it wasn't going well. So I'm going to read one quote from the medical director in California, because I think this really encapsulates the conversation we're going to have. The most tragic aspect of this crisis is that the massive effort to admit and restore patients are ultimately a waste of expensive clinical resources without improving the trajectory of a person's life. After returning to jail and standing trial, they are most likely worse off, either released without resources to the same circumstances that precipitated arrest or incarcerated. And so when we think about that constant revolving door in our legal system and our justice system, this is oftentimes where it starts, right? We don't have individuals receiving or continuing the same treatment. That kind of goes back to what we talked about last time, right? The civil commitment laws, AOT, how do we ensure people continue the treatment that they need? And then that bleeds over here into the conversation we're having today about competency and competency restoration. Wouldn't you agree, Renee?
Yeah. And I actually think that I learned this in studying about this, learning more about it from my own work, that people get charged for the days that they're incarcerated while standing for trial. So there's actually a fee that's assessed to people. So back to the quote you just said, they end up worse off because then now they have bills assessed upon them. And if they had a job or had a home or anything while they're sitting in this limbo process, they've lost often those things. And so even if they came in with a home and with a job, and depending on how long the process takes, they could be sitting there for quite a while. And so the quote that you read is really true. It's an expensive process, not just from the cost of lawyers and courts to do the business, but for the person themselves and their own personal resources.
Yeah, and I think that it's a complicated subject then to try to unwind as we think about competency, right? And so what does it mean to be considered restored? We talk about competency, we talk about being evaluated for competency, but what does it mean to restore competency?
Right. So the idea with restoration of competency is then that the person is able to participate with their defense lawyer and understand those legal proceedings with a rational and factual situation, that they understand what they've done, that they understand how the process is going to work and what the potential consequences are. Because through that process, right, not only are they charged with the particular crime, but they might be offered a plea deal or different things, and they have to be able to understand the ramifications of those choices. And so if they take a plea deal and don't understand that means it could include incarceration, that isn't considered fair for them. So that's a big piece. Then they also have to improve in their psychological functioning, their cognitive functioning, or whatever, undergoing treatment. So they have to see like an improvement over time, and to be at the end kind of prove that they can manage their affairs again. So again, making sure that a person is able to make decisions on their own, that they have the ability to make those choices. And there's going to be some people who maybe due to an intellectual disability or an injury who never can be restored to competency because their brains don't allow them to think clearly enough to make choices. And that's another segment we may not talk about in depth today, but it's a hard place to be, because if they're never able to be restored to competency, then they're kind of stuck in that system where they're not really free, but they're also not really incarcerated, but they're also not really restorable, if that's a word. And so they're kind of in limbo, and that's a growing challenge, I think, across the country. So Jason, how long does it take for restoration? How long are we talking about here?
Well, on average, I think your statistic here says 149 days to restore. And for the life of me, I'm trying to think of some of the states we've been in where we've been to their institutions. And I don't have that off the top of my head. I wish I would have pulled that data, but it doesn't take a really long time. And really, when we talk about competency restoration, especially with some of the behavioral health conditions, a lot of times, sometimes that's managed with medications, right? That when someone's on their medications, when someone's going through treatment, and adhering to treatment, then they are able to be restored during those timeframes. And so, that would be a stay. Generally, competency restoration historically has taken place in state hospitals, Renee, and a lot of times with a medical team, psychiatrists, in order to do that. What's the challenges when that's the only place this can occur?
Yeah. Well, I know that there are some community options for restoration of competency, and so they're not necessarily stuck in a facility, but there's still challenges with that, because you might have to wear a GPS monitor or ankle bracelet to be under house arrest, where you're limited to where you can go and where you can be. You might be limited in various ways to stay in trial. And if trials get continued and they get pushed back, that length of time could be a long time. And so people still, it is a little more convenient because you're in your home. You may be able to still maintain like your pets and if you have children in your home and those kinds of things, being in that community environment, but you're still limited to where you can go and be. You can't leave most of the times you can't leave your county, even your state. You don't just have the ability because you're in that pre-trial sentencing period. And then I unfortunately see people kind of waiting in that space to get in more trouble, because then they're still not maybe thinking as clearly, and they're trying to get that outpatient help, but they're a little more free. And although that seems better than an institution, then they're getting in trouble, because then they're still not thinking straight and still making bad choices. So piling upon charges upon charges. And so it's a really sticky conversation all the way around, because at least inside they are likely to get less charges while they're being restored, but not always.
In reality, is there really access to community-based restoration? Like, are there really the supports limited, appropriate and available in most communities?
Yeah, most communities it's really limited, especially as you know, in rural, which is our forte, right? Rural is even harder. It might be available in some of your bigger communities, but even then, is it really? I don't know that to be true.
So where do we see most people who are awaiting competency restoration? We see mostly in jail, because they're waiting to go to a state institution or a state hospital,
and they get charged by the day for their time in that.
Right. And they wait, and so and it's variable. A lot of times people don't get treatment while they sit in jails. No. I mean, there's some jails that do some telepsych, so there may be medications provided. There may be a nurse, right? But there's generally not ongoing counseling and therapy. No. So generally people who may be mentally ill, who may be waiting for competency restoration. Some of these places we've heard and we've seen have waited for up to 6 months sitting in jail for a crime that they wouldn't even do that long in jail. Right. Yes. And so,
absolutely. Absolutely. We just had one that came through that was in a situation where they've put in so much time waiting that by the time they processed it, the time is served, and you don't have any way to give back the time. You can't go negative time. So you can't give back the time they sat in jail waiting for the hearing. But by the time they had the hearing, they could wipe it. And I mean, we heard how many stories about that during the pandemic, where the courts were closed, that people were left sitting in facilities just waiting. And those stories were horrendous, because there's no due process in that. There's no, your legal rights are nothing. And there were people that weren't officially charged at that point,
Right.
who just were sitting in prison, incarcerated. And then by the time you got to the bottom of the charges, they were let go. So not only were they incarcerated unfairly, but then they weren't even really accused of anything wrong doing at the end of the day, but weren't able to work for that period of time, not at their homes, not caring for their pets, all those things. And so yeah, this is a systemic issue that really came to a head during the pandemic, and we're still sort of unwinding from all of that backlog and all of that waiting list that occurred through that period of time. And we're 4 months or 4 years out, and it's still kind of unwinding. It's been a long time.
So we're going to link a couple of what we think are really good resources, right? And I've been doing a lot of research lately on restoration, and what that looks like and how it can look different. And so there's some really good documents, and I've cited for you the Justin Well, Rethinking How States Approach Competency to Stand Trial. And I also have linked for you the SAMHSA, exploring the stand to trial evaluations and competence restoration guide. I think those are both easy reads. And I think our conversation here kind of helps you to understand just how difficult having the conversation can be, because this also involves multiple different systems, from law enforcement to the judicial to community behavioral health to state institutions. And we know that the flow of information and communication and partnership across all four of those entities, and many times hasn't existed or hasn't been strong in the past. And so that creates a lot of gaps and a lot of opportunities for people to fall between the cracks of all of those systems.
Yep. And you think about all of those systems too. And it also, rightly or wrongly, is going to come down to who's fiscally responsible for that person sitting in this waiting period. And, if they can bill the person themselves, they do. If they can't, I know that there's laws and people trying to pass laws. I think in one of the states you're working in, right, that they want to pass a law to make HHS responsible to pay for the bad days that they're sitting in jail.
No, they did that. They made the hospital pay the jail for the days they're sitting in jail that the person isn't getting treatment.
That's right.
Well, it's the state paying it no matter what anyway. So it really didn't incentivize anybody to do anything different other than just spread the money around more.
Right. But it becomes such a complicated situation, because it's like, well, is it my fault that they're just sitting here waiting and I'm the housing of this while we're waiting for the treatment that's by somebody else? And like you said, none of those groups work together. So we have this all the time about how fast we can do parole revocations for the same reasons. It's like they're sitting there and there's a fund that's like whittling down the fund for how long they're in the county jail versus whatever. And there's bickering back and forth if they've waited, quote, too long. But when somebody's not competent, that time clock goes longer, and then lots of people get mad. It's not because the side that's doing the trial wouldn't do the trial, but they can't when the person doesn't understand the proceedings, which is legal. And so you have to wait till they understand the proceedings. But boy, a lot of people get mad because it's all about turf and who has to pay for what. So Jason, I know we always talk about data, and in this situation, we've got some good data for folks out listening about this. So how many people are we talking about here? Who's impacted? How do we know, like, how is this going? Who's involved? How many people? Is this just a couple people? What's happening?
Well, we do know in the last 20 years, the population that need competency restoration and competency evaluation has exploded. I'm not sure we know why it's exploded, but certainly as we have the conversation of mental health and mental health conditions, it has spilled over and we've seen it explode, right? And so we know within state hospitals, there's multiple data points you can go out there and look at, but the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors Research Institute found from 99 to 2014, a 72% increase in those folks who needed competency restoration, right? And so as we look at that and we look at the beds, and we've seen the pressures on beds of state institutions. I just read a report, and we're going to cite a report, kind of was based out of California, where they looked at 26 other states. And I read that quote to you earlier. It's been an issue across the board. Like, all states have felt their state hospitals really see a surge in this specific population.
Yeah. And so overall, the defense attorneys have concerns about client competency, and it's averaged about 8 to 15% of felony prosecutions. That's a lot. So every felony prosecution is somewhere between 8 and 15%. That's a big, big number. And then they're saying that about 20 to 30% of evaluated defendants then are found incompetent to stand trial. So they have concerns about 8 to 15 of the whole population, but of the ones that they actually do an evaluation for, 20 to 30% are found incompetent. And I don't know what those actual numbers are, but the numbers in each state, it's a big enough number that it causes pause about population and beds and all the things we've always talked about, because these folks are taking up spots that nobody else can take up. And they then, there's all the issues about the funding and all the different things. So there's quite a few people that get stuck in these spaces. And then even the bar, that's a bar to be competent to stand trial. It's still pretty low. So the people are typically still pretty sick, even if they pass that bar. So they've passed the bar, they're able to stand trial because they get what's going on and they were able to participate in their defense, but that doesn't mean they're magically cured and that they don't no longer have a mental health or substance abuse issue. So when I get them on our side in the incarceration period, wow, do we have some folks sometimes that are very, very sick that made it through the trial process, but they're still really unstable and maybe they've refused their medications or just don't think they need their medications or whatever the things are. And so this is just like that very beginning piece of the conversation of once you get them incarcerated, but then what? Because then you're putting them into institutions that are built for corrections and rehabilitation, but not mental health, not substance use. And so it gets to be very sticky at that point. And that's sort of the life that I live now, is on that side of it, going, wow, these guys are really sick, even though they were competent. Now it's like, that's a low bar, really.
Which that brings to life those statistics that we all know of the high percentage of individuals who are in our jails and prisons who have a substance abuse, mental health, or other co-occurring condition.
Right.
This is how that pipeline has built and occurs. And so as we think about how do we deliver competency restoration, right? Because we talked about, of those defendants who are incompetent, it could be up to 30%. And so that does become a large number in a lot of our states because they need very specific, very intensive treatment and care. And I'm not sure our behavioral health systems have always been built to deliver that. And so the state historically has done that more in an institutional setting. And as the volume has increased, I'm not sure our systems have adapted to be able to do something, because there's really some innovative models, right, that we can do this in other places other than just at a state hospital. Is that happening, Renee?
Well, I know in our state, we've added new beds. They've added beds with Glenwood closing down. We're adding some forensic beds, and it's specifically to have to address this. So it has been a shift of beds. We've also had the shift between the two institutions where they're going to have more adult and youth at one location and the other is more forensic in nature. All of that has happened exactly because of what you've said. Now, I haven't been able yet to really dive in to be able to speak clearly on this issue as where we are necessarily in Iowa. I'm really interested, and I'm going to be visiting all of this soon. So I'd like to come back and circle back on our specific state to see how we're doing, because we do know we're having to do more, and we do know it's becoming a challenge, and it's on two ends. So you've got this competency to stand trial end, and they're coming in, but then once they're in and if they remain unstable and remain ill, it's very hard to get them back out again because there's nowhere to go. And that's where we land with our work that we do every day. It's that throughput. And now I'm looking at it from the incarceration point, and I'm glad and I'm really happy to be here, because this became like the dumping ground for everybody with mental health and substance use while we were working on building a system outside of this. That can't be. So you have to look at this side too and get these folks the right care and right supports they need, so they don't come right back in. Because I've got so many people incarcerated that don't need to be here. They need more help. And if they had the right help and were stable in the community, they wouldn't probably be back in. Without it, they're going to be right back in. And so it's like there's like a point at which you're like, okay, on the front end to get them competent to come in, and then to get them the help and stabilized in the system, which is great. Some of those folks, that's the longest they sit down at one time to get treatment, is incarcerated. And that sounds terrible, but it's true. And so sometimes they're the most stable they've ever been incarcerated, which is horrible, but it's true.
Right.
And then
Absolutely.
you let them back out and they get more freedom, and then they're not sure they're sick anymore, or they decide that they're going to do without it because they're doing so great on the meds, blah, 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 blah. And then they're right back in with us again. So this is a really important thing, and it starts with a competency evaluation. And you're right, in our state, it is the state public defender's office that sort of heads this. So it's not something that a lot of private companies do. I think we have a couple that do it, but it's a minimum number. You're right. It really is in the state to have to kind of figure out how to do this. And it's a very specific niche kind of work.
It is, and even the competency restoration, takes on, a specialty care. I'm really impressed with the jail-based competency restoration programs that I've seen, that someone doesn't have to wait for one of those really limited beds, right? That a lot of people are going to be sitting in jail anyway. If we could get them the right resources and supports to start to restore competency and get them the right treatment while they're waiting in jail, sometimes we can divert them from that institutional bed altogether. And so those new beds, you talked about Iowa bringing on the new beds, we're kind of having discussions with other states that, do you really need new beds, or can you do a lot of this in the communities where people are serving, they're in jail already? Can we do some of that work there? There's also community-based restoration that low risk offenders, maybe they should just go back to their community with an ankle bracelet, go to a community provider, right? Really engaging the community, the provider system that should have been supporting that person in the first place, that maybe wasn't doing it so successfully, and doing community-based restoration, which I think have a lot of options. It's not for everyone, right? Neither of those options are for everyone. There's folks that we still need those institutional, the state hospital beds to serve because they're very acutely ill. And they're going to need those specialty services that only the state can provide. Let's be realistic. However, we have to be able to look at those other options. And so some of those resources we're putting in the links as well helps you understand what those options are. And I think we need to be putting more time and energy into those options because they're also cheaper, right? They make more sense economically if we can do a better job of getting people kind of in the right place that's going to work for them.
Right. And it really ties back to that quote you mentioned from the beginning there with California. The amount of monies that you put into this, if you could put that amount of money on the treatment side of this, or even the preventative side of this, just how much further along we'd be, because it's not just the process to go to trial, to go to prison. We could have helped, from those diversion type programs from the get-go for mental health diversion or substance use diversion, and getting people back to the treatment they need rather than in the system in the first place, which would be so much better use of our money. So today, the Recovering Politician Self-Care of the Week policy is week 2 for me. Self-care, it's the state fair. And do you know what today is? Guess what today is? It's hairball. It's hairball day today and tomorrow at my Iowa State Fair. And you may not love hairball like I love hairball, but I'm telling you what, if you don't have someplace that you can go and just be yourself and just have a good time and just be free, don't worry about what people think of you, just do your thing. That's what's most important to me. Whether you like hairball or not, it's not the thing. But if you go to something that you're just yourself and to have a good time with your friends and be around other people that are like-minded in that space, that's what self-care is about. And so sometimes it's not all about doing it all by yourself and doing the one-off solo massage, the solo nails, the solo, meditations and all that. Sometimes self-care is in a group setting. And I'm telling you what, for me, I'm not a big extrovert, and I'm not a person that likes big crowds until it's hairball day. And then I'm all about it. And so just challenging you out there, out and about, if you're have a state fair or you've got some other fun activity around the summer as you're winding down toward Labor Day here, thinking about what can you go do and celebrate with your people and your friends. That's something that you love to do, and go do it. And that just makes it all better. So Jason, did you have any thoughts on the state fair? Because I know
I was having deja vu, but I guess this fair runs for 2 weeks. So I guess that's why we're going to talk about hairball at the state fair.
Started
2 episodes in a row. So it started last week and we're revisiting it this week. Got it.
It's isn't it 12 full days of fun? I'm pretty sure.
That's why it spanned both episodes.
And you're a farmer. This is terrible.
I'm just trying to reconcile it all in my mind. I'm like, I feel like we've said this before. Fantastic.
Well, today we chatted all about competency and kind of how it works. Gave you some of those bullet points, like what's it mean to be competent or not competent to stand trial, and then some of the options that are out there. There's inpatient, there's community-based. all of this needs to grow more. This is a place that intersects right with our mental health and substance use systems, and we don't always work together. We usually keep these pretty siloed, but our people that are having challenges fluctuate right through this system and then come right back out and need community services. So this is definitely a conversation we need to continue. Hope to bring some folks on in the future that are more specialized in this area that can really talk it through it with us. Next time when we come back, we're going to have a guest speaker. Really excited to talk about mental health first aid and HR, and we'll see you then. Have a great day, everybody.